Cape Media News Conversations. I'm Sarah Colvin. Starting off the new year with a new round of interviews with our Cape delegation. I'm very pleased to welcome in studio, representing the 5th Barnstable District, State Rep Randy Hunt. Randy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, always happy to be here.
Happy New Year to you.
I'm really glad that you guys are doing this because it does give some focus on what's happening more locally. That you don't get on any other stations.
Well,
So
thank you. We
terrific.
appreciate that. And I think that, having a lifeline to what's going on up on Beacon Hill, getting our citizens a little more informed and engaged is certainly an important thing. So what's going on up in Beacon Hill? What are you working on these days?
Look, the major issues that are going on right now, criminal justice reform, and what are we going to do about the cost to the state of health care, which obviously expands to the cost of all the citizens who are paying for health care, all of our residents. So those two things are in different stages. The criminal justice reform includes a package of a lot of different changes to the criminal justice system. The Senate voted for a package, and that passed before the House voted for its package. We voted for our bill in November, and then since then it's been in a conference committee. The conference committee involves two Republicans and 4 senators. Put that back. 4 Democrats, 2 Republicans, 3 each from the House and the Senate. So that's the proper breakdown. So there's 6 people that are arguing this, but actually more than the 6 people are involved in the negotiations.
And what are the kind of the major issues, the major things that the criminal justice reform bill is trying to accomplish?
Well, they're trying to do a number of things that I think will be helpful. The premise of this is that incarceration of people generally results in a worse situation for those people who are incarcerated than not, particularly in cases where we have first-time offenders or there's some addiction issue that's tied into all of it, or people are kind of ancillary in what happened and are caught up in this. And what we find is most people that go and serve time come out the worse for it, meaning that their exposure to other people who are also incarcerated for 3 or 5 or 7 years or however long it is, leaves a person behind in many ways. Leaves them worse off from the standpoint that they're much more likely to recidivate and do the same types of things again. It also takes a giant period of their life away. So while they're in prison, one of the things that we're focusing on in this bill is to provide more education training classes so that you don't just have a blank spot in your life, and do a better job when they're transitioning out to be able to have a place to live, good circumstances, have a job. If you're dealing with addictions or mental health issues or something like that, having a counselor or doctor set up so that you have the best possible chance of putting your life back together and being a productive citizen. That's really the focus of what it's about. And it comes in many ways, reducing some minimum mandatory sentences for certain types of convictions, putting more in the way of training programs, a lot about how to deal with tough situations and how you react to things. It's kind of like my mom told me to count to 10 type of thing. And it's not meant to make light of that, but some people haven't had that kind of training and they just react. And sometimes those reactions get them into big problems. So that type of training in a prison or a house of correction has actually statistically shown to be one of the most valuable things that you can do. Actually more valuable than teaching a trade, believe it or not.
And I think some might argue that says what would make a criminal deserve this kind of a training? It's like jail's supposed to be a punishment. It's supposed to be a deterrent for crime. Why go through all the effort to kind of help these people so that they're better citizens on the other side?
Well, I get that, but you just answered your question right there. To be better citizens on the other side. Because if all you do is just hold people up for their prison term and then let them out, especially if you let them out without any supervision at all, which happens to about 70% of the people who are incarcerated, they end up with no parole because they'll serve their full term. And there's some reasons behind that, but I believe that people should come out with a plan, and it should be supervised for at least some period of time to make sure that they stay on the right track. So putting some money and effort into these programs results in a much lower chance of those people reoffending and then ending up right back in the prison system.
And I would assume ultimate savings as well for the state in terms of not having and having less prisoners and less things to pay for in that sense.
That's the theory. Although we've proven many times that having fewer inmates and having fewer kids in a school system doesn't necessarily mean that you have dollar savings that match that. So there are still issues that we have to work on around that. But it is a fact that our prison population compared to, as a percentage of the people that live in Massachusetts is one of the lowest in the country. And we also have one of the safer states in the country. So it's not, that may seem like a contradiction to some people that, the more people you lock up, the safer it is, but that's really not how it works out in the long term.
Interesting. So again, where is that bill in terms of
well, the
becoming
conference
law?
committee is banging it out, and eventually, I would imagine within a month or two, we will have a unified bill to vote on, and that will be an up or down process. So we would vote, no amendments allowed. So we vote on the compromise bill up or down, and then the governor would either sign it or veto it.
Sure. And you mentioned healthcare costs. Just wanted to touch on that briefly.
Yeah.
I've spoken with your colleagues, Rep. Whalen and Rep. Cocker, in terms of the impact that healthcare costs have on the budget. It's more than half of the state budget right now is taken up with healthcare costs,
Yeah,
which to me
it's
seems
huge.
just astronomical. So what are you considering? What are you working on? What are you thinking of in terms of trying to get that portion of the budget reduced?
Well, one of the biggest holes that we had blown into the budget was relative to Medicaid. Now, Medicaid is a program that, for the most part, we get half reimbursement from the feds. In some cases, a little bit more than that. For the expansion of Medicaid that we had under Obamacare, we get 90% reimbursement just for the expanded population. But what we found is the problem here is we have had as many people get onto Medicaid, which is state and federally paid, as we have seen leave private insurance from companies. That doesn't mean that they're all exactly the same people, but there has been a cottage industry that has grown up around trying to tell employers how to work it so that your employees end up going on Mass Health, which is Medicaid, instead of being on your own insurance program. And those consultants are just trying to save companies dollars. It used to not be allowed. If you had a plan, your employers had to have their employees eligible, and an employee would not be able to go on to Mass Health if there is an alternative.
Okay.
And there are limits on how much the portion that the employee would pay in that whole scheme. That went away with the Affordable Care Act. And so now it's been a free-for-all trying to get people onto Mass Health instead of insuring them privately. So we did make some changes in that and are putting an assessment back on employers that do that. So that will be helpful. But we need to take that a little bit further to close this, what's turned into about a $700 million budget gap. That is a big problem for us.
Sure. So certainly challenges ahead. Any other goals? Any other things that you're working on before we get into our discussion about taxes?
Yeah, more personally, we're working on a bill that we filed, our office filed, to ensure that people who are having mental health crises while they are inmates, whether that be with the Department of Corrections or with a sheriff house of corrections, get to treatment as soon as possible. We have some problems with being able to transfer somebody in that situation to a place where they can be evaluated based on the fact that not all sheriffs and not all houses of correction have somebody who is allowed to make that decision on staff 24/7. In fact, most of them don't. And if you have somebody that's in a mental health crisis, what we do know is the worst thing that you can do is constrain them, isolate them, and put even more pressure on them by doing those types of things. What they need is help, and they need it as soon as possible. What this would do would shorten the time, have more people who are actually at these places 24/7 or close to that, be able to make a decision along with a judge, that has to have a judge involved, to be able to get somebody out of there within hours instead of half a day or even over a weekend.
Great.
So we think that that will be able to be accomplished with a omnibus bill that's coming up to deal with a lot of different things relative to mental health.
Great. So wanted to tap into your expertise as a CPA in terms of looking at the kind of nationwide changes to taxes. Out of the gate, what are your thoughts on the changes to the national tax code?
Well, first of all, nobody knows what the larger impact is going to be for sure. So everybody who thinks they know are kind of like stock market predictors, and you know, if they happen to get close, they claim fame. And
looking into your crystal ball.
Yeah,
Okay.
if they're way off, then they just kind of try and forget. It's sort of like weathermen. Weathermen are the same way, you know.
Exactly, especially New England weathermen, right?
That's true. So we don't know exactly. We do know some things. We know enough about the bill that if we create some scenarios, which I did and posted on my Facebook page a few days ago, that if you're in certain scenarios, I can show you how the prior rules would have left you versus what the new rules do. And I picked 5 scenarios, 3 with couples, a couple making a couple $100,000 with 2 kids. That's a lot for this area of the state, for sure.
Sure.
Another couple making $100,000 with a couple of kids, and that's pretty common. You know, in fact, you know, if you had 2 teachers in the household, you could probably bring home close to $150,000. So you'd be kind of in between those.
Sure.
So it's not unusual to bring home $100,000 as a couple. And then the third couple is retired and has total amount of money coming in of $75,000. So I took those scenarios of couples, and I took a couple of single scenarios where single person, no kids, you know, up and coming, maybe, you know, a biotech guy or something like that, making $150,000 a year, how that would affect that person. And finally, a single person who is a single head of household with a couple of kids. This is typically a woman that is raising kids on a single job, or maybe has 2 or 3 jobs. This happens a lot. And
especially here.
That person I forget how much that person brought in.
75,000.
So under all of those scenarios, cutting to the chase, everybody pays less federal income tax under the new system. So I didn't pick scenarios that, you know, where people paid less and back into a situation. I just picked 5 scenarios that I thought were pretty common. And everybody pays less in those situations. Now, who would pay more? That's kind of an interesting thing.
That is an interesting question.
Here's the biggest thing. People that have really high state income tax and property taxes, that's going to be limited to a $10,000 deduction starting in 2018. So if that total for you is 20 grand or 25 grand, and you'd have to live in a pretty darn big house for it to be that big, or have a pretty giant salary to have that much state income tax, right? So we're not exactly feeling sorry for these people, but they're going to have their deduction severely crunched. And in the other case, and this is much more common, salesmen, for example. You have salespeople out there who, instead of turning in expense reports, you know, with their mileage and, you know, I ate here or there and whatever my expenses are, and turning them in and getting reimbursed, many salespeople are under a plan where the company says, look, we'll give you $500 a month or $1,000 a month, whatever is appropriate. We're just going to throw that in your salary. And then you can deduct on your tax return all of those expenses, okay? All right, that's okay, it makes it easier for the company because they don't have to worry about all of the, people reporting their time, their expense reports and all that kind of stuff.
Sure, a lot less data entry.
However, the new tax law got rid of the deductions for that.
Oh.
So there's a problem. You used to be able to have unreimbursed employee expenses on a form. The form is called a 2106 form, and you would be able to deduct those. You'd have to give up 2% of your income as a floor, so anything above that you could take a deduction on.
Sure.
I have plenty of clients that have tens of thousands of dollars in that category because they may drive 60, 80, 100,000 miles a year, for example. You drive 100,000 miles a year running a big route around New England, and at 54 cents a mile is what it is this year. That's a $54,000 deduction. So it's not, it's not small change. Those disappear. So people who are in that situation, they could likely see their taxes go up a lot.
Right, and so it seems that they'll have to renegotiate with their employers and say, hey, I'm not going to be able to deduct these things anymore. You've got to find a way to compensate me for this so I'm not getting
Either
screwed.
that or convince them to go back to what's called an accountable plan, and that's where you fill out an expense report, you turn it in, and they give you the money for that. And that doesn't show up as income to you, but
Right.
it's still an expense for the company. So I would suggest everybody try and talk their employers into doing that because this is going to be a mess. And here's another same category, people that spend money on stockbrokers, just account brokers. I have clients who are retired and they have a pretty good nest egg, congratulations. They spend $7,000, $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a year on fees for managing that. That disappears as a deduction. So the compensation for that is the standard deduction just about doubles, but in some cases that's still going to leave people in the red when they calculate their new taxes.
Right, and town collectors across Cape Cod and I think across the nation really saw people running in to pay their property taxes ahead of time, which is something really unusual.
I did that.
You did that too?
Yeah,
so
I did
what was
that.
that all about?
Well, that was related to this $10,000 cap on state or local income or property taxes. So starting in 2018, the most you can deduct for that is $10,000. So if you're going to itemize, and that number is expected to be higher than that in 2018, one of the tricks was pay your last two quarterly payments or the second half payment. Some towns have it in 2 halves and some in 4 quarters. Pay that by December 31st. And it'll work. And, we paid ours. Ours was, $3,400, I think. And so we paid it on December 31st. And that will, give me a one-time extra deduction in 2017, knowing that in 2018 that's going to disappear because of the cap.
Sure. So, larger concerns. Obviously, folks are concerned about the changes coming with this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Kind of big picture. When you think about this big picture, what does it mean for really our country as a whole?
Well, big picture, there's the biggest picture thing is 2 things. One is the lowering of the corporate income tax, and I'll put in the same category the ability for people who have pass-through entities to be able to take a deduction of 20% on what gets passed through to them. That, in effect, lowers their tax rate on that as well. So it's really in one category. So we're lowering it from as much as 35% down to 21%. So corporations are going to be at 21%. That will put more money on the bottom line of corporations. That extra money, if there's demand, would be able to be put to work in expanding, hiring more people. As the unemployment rate stays very low, there will be pressure on wages going up, so some of that may have to be used for that. And so the point that I make, though, is that businesses expand and start and grow only because of demand. So people have to get over this. Just because they have more money in the bank doesn't mean they're just going to build a new plant just because.
Right.
They're not going to build a new plant, put equipment in it, and then not hire anybody because there's no demand. The way the economy works is if there's demand, somebody will satisfy that. Okay, if that somebody happens to have extra money because of this lower tax rate, all the much better, because that will accelerate the process. The other piece is they're lowering the tax for bringing in money that's parked, net income that's parked overseas, that was never reported in the United States, down to 15.5%.
Really?
And so that will encourage companies to bring that money back, and instead of paying 35% on it, it would be at 15.5%. And we're thinking that that also will add to the capital that will be available, assuming demand is driving, you know, a need to expand, hire people, buy new equipment, that type of thing.
So theoretically, more money in people's paychecks, more money in the corporate bank should stimulate the economy, just by the sheer thought of, okay, more money means you can buy more things. More money for the companies mean they could hire more people, perhaps create a little bit more product. Theoretically, of course, all of that.
As long as there's demand that's driving that, yeah. Corporations spend money with other corporations too, you know, to buy all kinds of things, materials and equipment, that type of thing. So we'll see how that goes. But I'll tell you right now, it's not going to be, we're not going to be able to say it would have been X had nothing happened to the tax code. And it is exactly Y because of the tax code, and there's your benefit. That's impossible, because the economy is always moving. Some of the supply and demand dynamics won't be affected by this at all.
Right.
So, you know, some people would argue, well, it's going to be what it is going to be. And just because corporations can put more cash in the bank or pay bigger dividends to their shareholders or bigger bonuses to their CEOs, that is not actually helping the regular guy. So there's arguments on that side too. And I don't dispute those arguments. I'm just saying that it'll be a mishmash of all of that stuff. And I suppose if we are in 2 years at a 5+% GDP growth rate, then people are going to declare that this was the reason for it.
Well, again, as you said, we'll have to wait and see.
That's right.
So, Randy, if folks want to learn more about you, if they have questions, I know you're active on social media. You have a great blog. If the best way to get in touch or the best way to learn more for your constituents.
Oh, sure. Several ways. Follow me on Facebook. You can do that without asking to be my friend. So if you don't want to be my friend,
that's okay.
Nothing personal. I have 500-600 people that just follow me, and all that means is that they get to see the stuff that I post. It shows up in their timeline. They can't comment though unless they're a friend. So
right.
I'll friend everybody until I run out of whatever the limit is for friends. So that's one way to get kind of almost a daily injection of what I'm thinking. But you can also take a look at randyhuntstaterep.com or just Google Randy Hunt. That all pops up. I think the first entry, if you Google Randy Hunt, is a map with my house on it. So, that's how you get there. Which may have been, partly because the reason for so many people throwing empty nip bottles out at the end of my driveway, because I have a bill to add that to the bottle bill, but we're working on that.
As they should.
So they Googled my house, and I have to pick up empty nip bottles. So
lovely.
I'll take that.
But speaking of maps in a more positive way, I have to give you some credit for creating a really fantastic Google map for the Giants in Sandwich. Are those still up on display? Can people still see them, or have they been taken down yet?
Not many of them are still lit. The ones downtown in Sandwich at the fire station are still on, and there are a few here and there. But we had 66 Giants in town this year. It was something started by Michael Magyar, who's a glass blower and metal worker. Stonemason also, well, yeah, he does all kinds of stuff.
Very, very talented
guy. So he started this, and we added a few year after year. And the real problem was, because it's so dynamic, when you print a calendar or you print the Chamber of Commerce prints a book, it's out of date. The instant it comes out, it's not right anymore. So I created a little Google map so you could find Sandwich Giants. So just Google Sandwich Giants and you can see it. So really, it's kind of offline until next year. Usually the Friday after Thanksgiving, everybody lights them up and you get about a month to go and see them.
Fantastic. Well, Randy, thank you so much again, as always, for joining us. I really appreciate it, and we'll check in with you again in February.
Very good.
Thank you
Sarah.
so much. Randy Hunt, State Representative representing the 5th Barnstable District. Again, you can follow him on Facebook or visit his website, randyhuntstaterep.com. For Cape Media News Conversations, I'm Sarah Colvin.